Okay, this is Normandy Ellis, and we're at the home of Reverend Vicki Corkell, and she is the president of the IAOS and lives on the grounds of Camp Chesterfield. Thank you for doing this interview with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So could you just say a little bit about, tell me when you first came to Camp Chesterfield, and then when you came to live here, a little bit about those.
I was first led to the grounds by some friends, and what precipitated it was and I think as most people come to the grounds for the same reason, was the loss of a loved one. My younger brother, Jonathan, and his fiancée were killed on their way back to Ball State after the Christmas holidays, and you begin to ask questions. Why? I mean, he was a wonderful young man, and so that age-old question, why do bad things happen to good people, started me on a search. And some friends, I'd been reading Edgar Cayce, and some friends told me about a place where there were many Edgar Cayces. So they gave me directions, and I found my way up here one day and walked the grounds and got a reading. I think my first reading was with Reverend Patricia Kennedy, and never walked away.
Wow. So how often did you come here, and what were you studying before you decided to buy a home here?
I was a student of Reverend Suzanne Greer. I came up every Tuesday night for class, and then every weekend that I was able to, and I studied with her for about 10 years. I moved onto the grounds, let's see, I found the grounds in '88 and moved onto the grounds in '90. And there was a time, I think I left in '95 because I had a need to continue some education, and I wanted to go to regular seminary at Earlham, so there I laugh and say, I took so many classes, but I did get a Master of Divinity, and I majored in peace and justice, and then kind of minored in pastoral care and counseling. And my intention at the time was, I thought I had enough here, and was to be a recorded Friends minister. Well, Friends are, like all organized religions, I guess, fractured off into these different theologies, and I wasn't too happy about them much more. And the entire time, the thing about Camp Chesterfield is, once you're here, it's like it's insidious. It gets into your blood. It just stays with you. And so there was always that calling me back, until some of my friends up here called and said, "Are you done with your vacation? Because we need you back to camp now." And so then I started coming back. But I was gone for, I don't know, about 10 years maybe, and came back, I don't remember when, 2005 or something like that. So then I've been here full-time ever since.
Okay, so you said you studied with Suzanne Greer, Reverend
Yes.
Suzanne.
Yes.
And that's where your gifts developed. Tell me a little bit about studying with her and the things that you did.
She was absolutely wonderful, and I was extremely shy. And when I would first give messages, which was like pulling teeth for me, I would stand, and bless her heart, and now that I understand energy, now I understand what she was doing for me. she would stand behind me and put her hands on my shoulders, and I would stand with my head, I would be boring holes in the floor with my eyes and trying to give messages, but she was sharing her energy with me and helping me learn to connect and helping me learn to understand the symbols that Spirit gives us and the flashes that we hear or that we see and that first impulse, that first thing that pops in, recognizing that as a message from Spirit. And she was so gifted that I count myself lucky as to have spent that length of time with her.
Mm-hmm. Were there other students in that class that then have become part of Chesterfield's history?
Yes, actually, Steve Dillon was in that class,
Mm-hmm.
and Reverend Elaine Clark had been in that class with me, and of course she's gone now. Reverend Steve is on the grant; he's a resident here, and those are the ones who stayed. There were maybe 4 or 5 others who, and that's kind of typical of students, come and go, and yeah.
Were there other teachers besides Suzanne that you studied with or remember well?
Excuse me, yes. I spent a little bit of time with Reverend Louise Irvin, and she really wanted me to be a trance medium, but I just didn't feel that call. They turned the lights out, and it takes a special talent to be a trance medium. But then I also, she wouldn't say it to this day, but I counted her as a teacher, and that was one of my closest friends up here was Reverend Sarah Brown, and she was a wealth of wisdom and gave me a greater understanding of the metaphysical side of spiritualism, as well as Reverend Ellen McReynolds, who has passed now, and she was a nifty little metaphysician who knew her stuff. Yeah.
That's nice. I haven't had a lot of people talk about Ellen McReynolds yet, so.
Yeah, Ellen was I was married to Corky, and we had the bookstore for 4 or 5 years, and Ellen, who was great friends with Reverend Phyllis Harrison, and they studied astrology together and palmistry and those kinds of things, and Ellen would come every weekend, and she would stay with Phyllis, and they would do their thing. But Phyllis had lots and lots of readings, so what Ellen would do was she would come up saying she was coming to visit Phyllis, but then she would come over to the bookstore, and she would sit with me all day long for 2 days and teach me a plethora of wisdom that she had in that little head of hers. She had been studying quite a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good.
That's cool. Thank you for telling me
Sure.
that. So is there, are there other important lessons, and maybe you got those in the classroom, and maybe you got them during a reading of some type, or even from the platform? What were some of the important lessons that you felt like in your early days of being here came to you?
Well, let me say it this way. I think lessons evolve. As you evolve, lessons get more complicated or on a grander scale. And looking back at that time, I was such an, kind of an innocent and enamored with everything. But the biggest thing was, and this is kind of funny, and it's kind of hard to explain, but The biggest thing was how what I was learning kind of harkened back or tied in or linked in with my early Quaker upbringing, which was the meditation and the sitting in silence and waiting for spirit or God or however you want to call that, waiting for that to be, that inspiration to be brought in. And so the grounds, and often I would just walk the grounds, not the outside perimeter on the street, but down here through the middle, because the peace that you get is so comforting. But there's also a certain degree, when you start listening, there's a certain degree of inspiration that comes through that it's impossible to believe that that's just you. And so so learning to touch in with that and finding that, I think, were some of the earliest lessons to really look inward, but at the same time as of looking in that, having that inward glance, to also understand that there's this wealth of information that we can tap into. Mm-hmm. And then later I understood a lot about energy and how energy is creative and how it can also be destructive, and how energy is used and how it flows and moves, and I can say it energy, but sometimes if using it in a more religious sense, it's like the breath of God that just blows over everything, right. and then you are into that flow, and then it, and then you use that in a creative sense. So.
Right. And I know that you said you used to love to walk the grounds, and that your house, in fact, both houses that you've owned overlook the grounds. Right. Is there a particular place you find yourself drawn to?
This is the best place. This is the best place. And the thing about it are the mound-like structures. I'm fascinated by the way the land is laid out, and I know that there's a vortex in the center of the grounds, and I know that there's a vortex out at the end of Western Drive, just on the other side of Rita Hall's home, and that fascination with the center of the grounds, I think, that's my most, and the fact that I can sit here and see it now is great.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's good. Let's see. Can you talk about any of the other mediums that you studied with, or have seen perform from the platform, give messages from the platform that you like? Yeah, there was somebody who knew how to give a message.
Well, that's Suzanne Greer. You just sat and I mean, when Susie was in her prime, I think most of the students, and not to minimize any of the other mediums at all, because each one brings their own special gift, mm-hmm. and their own special, unique self up to that platform, and you can tell when they all truly step into spirit, and spirit kind of steps into them, and they are giving those evidential messages. But in terms of presence and just overall out there, the minute she stood up and her foot stepped out, she was fully in spirit, and was so animated, that folks came just, and honestly, and if I were to tell young students today, I don't work like that, I can't. I think that is that is a gift that few people have. But I would tell students, if they want to do well, go to church and watch your favorite medium, or watch them, or see how they touch in, see how they present the message. That is the best advice I could give a student who's going through school. And one of the things Suzanne told me is that when she was a student and going through seminary here, what she would do is she would go and she would watch the mediums, and then she would go home and she would spend her visioning time seeing herself on platform, seeing herself give evidential messages, so that when she came back, then the vision would become the reality. And that was one of the best lessons I knew.
Wow,
And,
that's beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So I know that you teach primarily most of the ordination classes, and you do the ordinations. So what can you tell me about the call to become an ordained minister for yourself or for other people?
Well, that's difficult to speak for other people. I can speak for myself, and that is I think that when there is a point in time where you make a commitment, whether you realize it or not, and here I am, Spirit, use me. And the minute that's said, you can't get out of it. You can try to run away from it, you can kind of ignore it, but until you do what you are supposed to do, life isn't going to go very smoothly for you. But I also believe, and whether people hear that call and want to step into that professional role, and that's what that is, whether if they want to step into that professional role, I think that does take a particular commitment that somebody has to feel so drawn to that they are able to not only reach out to Spirit, but also reach out to those who are crying for help, and try to be that conduit for that degree of spiritual energy flowing through you and helping them. And the best one.
We'd love to hear stories. Please.
I have an astounding healing story.
All right.
And it was actually Reverend Andy Devine he and his wife lived over in the little stone house that Julie Fioresci owns now. And Andy and Virginia Devine were just magnificent healers. Extremely spiritual, very religious. And Sarah Brown told me the story, and she and her friend Harthaline, who was from Kentucky, came up, and they had been coming here for some time, long before I knew her. They'd been coming here for some time. Sarah developed cancer at a young age, and it was she said that the cancer was wrapped around her spine. It was kind of pretty insidious. And one day she'd been scurrying around, and she went to Andy's for healing. And it was herself and Andy, of course, and Virginia, and Harthaline was allowed to be in the room. And she was sitting in a chair off to one side. And what Sarah told me was that Andy would be at the head, and Virginia then would be at the foot, and the energy would flow that way. They would open themselves up to spirit, and the energy would flow that way. And everybody was used to it. They knew what was going to happen, and they knew what they did. And Harthaline said that at one point Andy broke off and walked away from Sarah's head, and Sarah was laying on her stomach. And Harthaline said that Andy reached down and literally pulled a mass out of her back and dropped it, and Harthaline, of course, had that same reaction that you just had, only louder. And Virginia looked over at her and said, "Don't you say a word." It was almost as if Andy was in some kind of trance. He went back to the head, okay, and they finished their healing session, and Harthaline was told by Virginia, "Do not say a word to anyone." I can tell this story now because they're all gone. Sarah didn't believe a word Harthaline said, okay, until she went to her oncologist, and they took pictures, and there wasn't a thing there.
Wow.
And her oncologist took her into his office and sat her down and said, "What did you do? Because there's nothing there." And she said, "I went to my friend Reverend Andy Divine, and he did a healing on me."
Wow.
And she was free of cancer for forever. From then on, from that point, never had another session.
Wow.
And that speaks to me of spirit. No matter what people say, you know, and there are always detractors, and there are always non-believers, and there are always people that want to see us fall by the way, but spirit is here. The other story is, and I think you might remember this one, when Suzanne did her first seance, and nothing had been done for a long time in the Sunflower. And they did that seance in the Sunflower, and more than one person told me individually after that thing was over, that first one, was that woman came down the stairway, the staircase, in flowing robes, manifested spirit coming down that. And if only just one person had told me that, I would have thought, well, I don't know, you know, maybe that. But multiple people saw the same thing. And then I've been told that there's a woman's face that appears in the upper floors of the Sunflower on occasion. So spirit is here. Spirit is here for the people who need spirit. Sarah, of course, must have had a huge, and she did. She went on to be a magnificent minister and advocate and caretaker of others. But spirit is here, and spirit works with us in ways that are both subtle and extravagant. And the only thing people have to do when they come is use their own discernment, but be so open to spirit that they will understand what it is that is touching them and helping them see the world with a different perspective, or learn some wisdom that helps them, you know, along the way. I mean, those are some extravagant stories, I know, and I'm certain that there are others. But just simply knowing that the comfort and the peace and the awesomeness of spirit exists on these grounds will help people with whatever problem or whatever issue they come here for. So that's my advertising for camp.
That's great.
It's what keeps me here. How many people can we have walk through the grounds, and if they do nothing but walk out here on these sacred grounds, stand in that vortex, or sit and feel touched by spirit in their meditation, then we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. That we've made ourselves available, we've kept it here, we've kept it sacred, and shown the kind of love that hopefully Spirit is, that we are hopefully showing the kind of love that Spirit already has enveloped us with. And that's kind of it.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me tonight.
Thank
And
you for letting me.
I really appreciate this.